Welcome to today's discussion, Decluttering Your IT, Why It's Time to Decommission Legacy Applications. My name is Sharon Marcone, and I am the Marketing Director for Archive 360. Thank you for joining us today. Before we launch into what I'm sure will be a very informative discussion, I would like to acknowledge today's sponsor, Archive 360. Archive 360 delivers a modern archiving platform that empowers organizations to solve complex data governance and compliance challenges while enabling AI and analytics. This trusted, accurate, protected data becomes a strategic asset ready to support the customer's business goals and initiatives. Next, I'd like to introduce our speakers. Peter Haney, founder and CEO of Through Technology. Peter is a solution leader with over 20 years experience leading infrastructure transformation projects in the UK public sector, working on both client and supplier sides. Peter combines technical ability and proven commercial acumen with a strong view on ICT strategy and the ability to communicate complex technical issues in a clear, authoritative manner. Our host for today, George Tahanis, VP of Compliance for Archive 360. George has extensive experience working with clients with complex compliance and data risk-related challenges. He has worked with many large financial services organizations to design and deploy petabyte-scale compliant books and record systems, supervision and surveillance, and e-discovery solutions. George holds a JD from DePaul University and is licensed to practice law in the state of Illinois and the U.S. District Court for the Northern District of Illinois. So with that, I'd like to turn things over to George.
Thanks very much, Sharon, and thanks, Peter, for joining us. It's a pleasure to have you, and appreciate you taking some time out to talk about this case study with us and talk about the work that Through Technologies has done with this client. Maybe by way of set up an intro into what we're going to discuss, maybe provide some background on this agency and really what the challenge was that they were trying to address and how you were and what you were looking to do and help them solve through this problem.
Yeah. So our customer in this case is His Majesty's Courts and Tribunals Service in the UK. So they run all of the courts and tribunals across the UK, covering a vast range of subjects. They identified the need for a strategic archiving and data management solution and wanted a provider to come in, work with them to develop that, design and implement, and then operate the solution. As a customer, they're literally working at the core of the justice system in the UK. So lots of personal data, lots of data with very long retention requirements. So if someone is adopted in the UK, their records will be kept for their entire lifetime. So along with that, very complex business processes, in some cases quite archaic, right? Some of them go back to 1066 and the Magna Carta. But they also have a lot of old legacy applications. So lots of siloed applications targeted at individual functions. So there'll be applications for divorce, for employment tribunals, for criminal cases, for the magistrates' courts and the crown courts, for the transcription and recording of audio on court hearings. So along with that comes a lot of data. Every court hearing in the UK is recorded for audio 4 separate times. All those recordings are then kept along with the documents and metadata and other information that was going on in the courtroom at the same time. So the biggest challenges really were a large number of different data sources, all of different architectures, owned by different stakeholders, performing similar functions. A high bar set for security and compliance, and also some real key time drivers, things like contracts coming to an end where they need to exit legacy systems, exit data centers, are really driving the timescales.
And what was interesting, I think, as part of this, and one of the challenges a lot of companies and a lot of agencies face that you faced here is it wasn't just you had a lot of different systems, you had many different generations of technologies as well.
Yes. Yeah. We're working with systems, um, some of the systems they're shutting down at the moment will date back to the 90s. But some of our use cases are take out the valuable data so the old system that supports it can be switched off. Because these old systems are being kept there purely for the valuable data that's within them. Whereas for some of the other systems, we're also working with brand new applications for the court service, where actually they don't want to keep all of their old data in the most expensive tiers of cloud storage on the most performant systems, but they want to be able to move it somewhere where they still have access, where they can still access their data when they need to, and where they can manage the compliance side. So we're dealing with everything from applications that are being developed today through to things that have green screen interfaces on the front that were sort of developed late 90s.
And like a lot of initiatives, really you're looking at both risk and compliance as well as costs. And when you were looking, I guess, across these legacy systems, and as you were looking at how are you going to start to actually put something in place that obviously will address these the challenge that we've just laid out. I guess how did you look at both the cost side of the equation and then the risk and the compliance side of the equation?
Yeah, I mean, this is a really interesting thing. It's real key to addressing the legacy technology challenge is you've got three areas. You've got risk, cost, and opportunity. On the risks, they vary over time differently. So if you have a system that dates back to the 90s, the security risks around it will be negligible simply because it's no longer a target. And you can manage those security risks with where you host it, how you protect the network boundaries, interfaces into it, and so on. But so security risk tends to peak just as the technology goes out of date and then drop off. Whereas you also have to consider availability risk in terms of that data needs to be accessed. It's key to the operation of your business. You need to be able to get to it. So the system has to be supportable. If not by the vendor, then you need to ensure the components and the skills are still available. And that's an element of risk that just increases over time, as does your compliance risk. If new legislation comes out, those older systems might not be adaptable to meet it. And then you also have the element of roadmap risk. The longer you leave data in an old system, the longer the upgrade path to get from legacy technology to new. Sometimes it simply becomes impossible to do it in one hop. So risk varies over time, and you need to look at what matters to your business in terms of those risks. The driver really is availability and supportability typically. You then have the opportunities. A lot of these systems were designed a long time ago. And if data is siloed within them, there can be all kinds of opportunities for your business that can be accessed by taking the data out of the silo, looking at the data model, looking at your common use cases for how you want to use that data, and build in that data governance. A simple example of the courts in the UK is, as a UK citizen, I can be married, divorced, adopted, the victim of crime, the perpetrator of a crime, well, I have been. I could be a juror. I sat on the jury in a case. I could have gender reassignment, and I could have a legal dispute with my employer in an employment tribunal, and about 50 other use cases. Now, with that data siloed in those individual applications, if I, under GDPR, did a subject access request, and I said, court service, tell me all the data you have on me. Before this system comes in, you would have 20 requests going to 20 different people who pull out information in 20 formats. If we start to aggregate that data, bring it under one common set of governance, and do simple things like identify person name across all those systems, then you can drive massive efficiency and you can service some of these use cases so much faster and quicker and deliver some real savings. So that's part of the opportunity, is in just looking at that data again. The second thing is these legacy systems typically won't have the performance or the accessibility or other things necessary to do analytics or AI on those data sets. And then you have the cost elements. You have the support cost typically increase as systems age and they become harder to maintain. And with modern cloud-based technology, we now have consumption-based charging. So as your data ages and is accessed less frequently, the value in keeping it on the highest tiers of high performance storage, inexpensive modern systems, pales off. So it makes sense to have a data retirement strategy, even for your modern applications.
Yep. Great. And so one of the things that I think you did early on in trying to then discern, well, where do we start, right? Because you obviously are facing this very broad set of systems to look at. You developed what were called the 5 Rs that you went through to start to measure and decide how it is and what platforms we're going to look at first and how we prioritize.
Yes. So I talked about those different types of risk: security, availability, supportability, compliance, and roadmap. So with HMCTS, we actually scored different applications for those different levels of risk with a weighting for which ones mattered to the customer. We could then look at the level of risk and pain those systems were causing the business and prioritize a number of projects to see that risk come down over time. Now, when we talk about the 5 Rs, that's our sort of 5 Rs of legacy technology. You can retain it, as in just keep the thing running. You can retire it, ditch the system, ditch the data. You can replace it with something new. You can rehost it in a different location on a different platform, or you can re-platform it onto a modern system. So once you've looked at and prioritized these legacy systems, you then look at which of these 5 Rs is the best approach for that particular system. And then that drives whether you're migrating your data out, whether you move all of it or some goes to archive, whether you simply turn the thing off, or what your approach is from that point forward. I think another key thing is how long you have to keep that running for and how you minimize the spend while you do.
Yeah.
So that's a different topic.
And one of the other things that you developed was, or you prioritized really, was the focus on the data, right? And how can data become a resource rather than really just a repository? And so it's looking at the data as opposed to the system. Too often, I think people think about, I've got a system, I got to like take this system and just move it to another system or whatever, create a similar, more modern form of that system, as opposed to, it's really the data I care about. It's not the system.
Yeah, in fact, one of the real goals and challenges is to break that link from the data to the legacy system and architecture it was built on. With these aging applications, the whole point is to take the data and put it into a resource, into an archive where the business can get value from it. Now, we don't want to maintain the dependency on the legacy technology, and we don't want to maintain some of those decisions which made sense 10 years ago when the application was developed, but don't now. So when we are moving that data, we'll look at the data model for it. And we also look at what format the data's in. Archive to Azure was brilliant for us because it supports any file format at all. And we could design and develop our own metadata to reflect the access model, the search criteria, and the permissions that were needed for that data. So those key attributes can be carried across, but you don't have to do it in the old format you need or you needed for the old technology. So, and again, where we're talking about data retention on the span of a human lifetime, it makes a lot of sense for us to then look at the data formats and longevity of those, and also how you store the data in the archive. So there are kind of 3 types of archive. Sometimes you'll want to be looking at data, your use case might be that your users will still need to look at the individual data records and pull back individual records 20 years later. Or your use case could be this was a whole bunch of valuable financial data on which we did analytics in the day and we need to keep it. So you might be archiving at a record level of granularity, or you might just want to take the whole data set, keep it, and then be able to pull it out for analytics again in future should you require. So the data model and the level of granularity with which you store it can change when you implement this type of approach. So it really brings your data governance in line with your modern business practice rather than the business practice your application was designed for 10 years ago.
Yeah, and it is interesting because we have financial services clients as examples who are doing the same thing, individual records, and at the same time, we're also managing their models that they're using for their risk management, right? And the sets of data that they ran their Monte Carlo analyses on with the model and the data. And so it's interesting that the court system ends up doing the same types of things as, again, a private organization or a financial services or other companies.
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
Uh,
I was going to say, it's interesting. I've thought of like the metaphor before you mentioned the Magna Carta. The Magna Carta was probably, I think it was written on vellum, and we don't write on vellum anymore, but we can still read what the Magna Carta says. I can pull the Magna Carta up almost, I'm sure, on any resource. And that's really what we're trying to get to as well, get these sets of data out of legacy systems, but then make them usable, again, through these business processes and also now for analysis and analytics and accessibility.
You hit on a term that I use quite a lot, which is creating a resource, not a repository. When we started out on this project, people were thinking of archiving as in putting things into filing boxes and sending it off to a big warehouse like the one at the end of the Indiana Jones movie, where it would go on a forklift, it would go on a shelf somewhere, and they could pull it back at some point. Yeah. The idea that you'd actually be creating a repository where users can still access the data by doing searches from their desk, where it's still effectively online, but just from a different system. The idea that the data from all of these different applications could suddenly be available to the user through one portal with one set of credentials, all single sign-on. Some of that was just not in the customer mindset for what archiving meant to them. Yeah. So it really is about that, creating a business resource, not a repository now. It's not just somewhere, it's not the elephant's graveyard where this stuff goes to die. It's somewhere where it goes to be actively managed and still of value to the business.
And one of the things that is a little bit unique, obviously, in our platform is the ability to manage data that's highly structured and then obviously highly unstructured, giant audio files or things like that. Can you give a sense for the range of the types of data that the court system's managing, obviously, through our archive now?
Yeah, so I mentioned one of our biggest use cases is digital audio recording and transcription. So where they record audio for the court hearings, but then also transcribe those hearings. And that data is then kept because a legal challenge in future could rely on what was said in the courtroom. So they might check the transcription, but then have to go back to the individual recording from that part of the courtroom at that time. So that's one example. I often say to other customers, that the court service and the Ministry of Justice in the UK will have examples of most application architectures you'll run across in most stages. So we'll have various different databases from proprietary stuff, Microsoft, SQL, Oracle. There'll be a lot of associated files in terms of the legal documents that have been sent or presented as evidence or whatever. So we really have a wide range. And I think the value with the Archive 360 platform is that all of those things are just files. We have our records with their metadata, and then we have files associated with them, and the capability to pull those back or preview them as well, and control all of that through some granular role-based access control, so we can preserve the security model around the data, even when we're moving it out of the legacy system that used to control that into the archive. So I use the term agnostic. It's largely file type agnostic. We don't really care what the files are, as long as we understand what's in them and capture the appropriate metadata around them. And then with the database records from these old proprietary databases or database models, that's where we look in a bit more detail and look at what that data model should be in the archive to maintain access and the use the data was put to, but also to mean it can be leveraged for these wider use cases.
Absolutely. So when we get down to the benefits, we see the benefits then around the accessibility, obviously improve the ability for people to go find and retrieve this information, and manage it and govern it. But there was real cost saving projection as well out of this, right? I mean, can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so this archive forms part of a wider program of modernization across the courts, where they are replacing a lot of these old legacy applications. They're exiting legacy expensive hosting and application management contracts. So this is a real enabler for that change and modernization across the courts, because the historic position of we need the data so we'll keep the application. We talked about the costs earlier. It drives up those costs. It also keeps that data locked away and inaccessible from those benefits we talked about. So, so there's this. If I was to show you the old architecture model for the Modernizing Courts program, this sits at the core of it, enabling decommissioning of these data centers and legacy systems.
And that's really what's interesting is when people think of archives, they think of it as a place that data goes to, again, get, stored securely and governed and all that. But really,
yeah,
a modern archive, a modern platform is an enabler to all of these other things, data modernization, and a broader data strategy. And now with AI and analytics, this is now data that can be consumed by those systems as well that were previously locked away.
yeah, and that's a key thing is we had the term garbage in, garbage out when I was doing my IT degree many years ago. When you are looking into leveraging AI or any analytics on your data, it's entirely dependent on quality of the data going in. So if you are adopting those use cases anyway, then you need to be getting a grip on your data governance. It's worth having a look at that data model, seeing if it supports the use cases that you're looking to implement, making that data accessible, creating the ability to search and pull out elements of that data set for the analytics. So this is really, I'm trying to think of a good term for it, but it's an essential prerequisite of moving into AI analytics and delivering those systems, not just AI analytics, right? That simple use case I talked about earlier of finding every instance of Peter Hannay across the entire court service history. All the points in my lifetime I touch base with the legal system in the UK. That is just a result of good data governance. It doesn't even require AI. So you can really unlock a lot of benefits just by breaking down those old silos, looking at how your old data already supports your new use cases. If you just bring it under control and make it accessible and searchable.
As we look to wrap up here, a lot of people, I'm sure, are starting to think. They think through these problems, but where would you recommend they start? Like, how do you start? You look across your portfolio of hundreds or even thousands of legacy applications, and it can be overwhelming. So how do you encourage them to start?
So I think the starting point is always some form of discovery exercise. It's understanding, it's going out and looking at your systems and looking at the value of the data and the risks associated with the legacy system on which it's hosted. I think I would do an initial cursory look, particularly focused around supportability, availability, and security at each of those data sets that you have. And then I'd be looking for an application zero. I'd be looking for a good candidate that carries a lot of business risk, where you can run that as a trial and move that data to an archive solution to prove the process. Because it's something that organizations have put off. Historically, you've been able to run these systems and just keep them alive. But I think with the pace of technology, the adoption of cloud services, and the lack of control of the technology roadmap that brings, coupled with new use cases like AI, actually the cost of maintaining the legacy is growing steeply, and the missed opportunity cost is also growing rapidly. So really, you need that process of starting with the discovery, prioritization based on the risk and data value, doing the essential maintenance to keep these things ticking over whilst you implement the strategy, and then move into the 5 Rs of i.e. retaining, retiring, replacing, replatforming, rehosting. But start off by surveying your landscape at a high level, sort of helicopter view, as it were. Pick a good candidate, trial the technology, trial the process, look at the data model, and go from there.
Well, great. Peter, we really appreciate your time, and thanks for all the insight that you were able to provide today. And we look forward to continuing our discussions in the future.
Yeah, thank you very much.